Okay, so this chapter is on rational numbers, and rational numbers are numbers that can be written as a fraction, which means that it includes all terminating and repeating decimals. So operations with rational numbers really should include not only operations with fractions, which is what we've done for the entire unit so far, but also operations with decimals. You have learned all these before. These are not this is not a 7th grade topic. It's not in your book because you learned it last year. Okay, so that means we're just going to quickly go through the how do you add and subtract and multiply and divide decimal numbers. Now the rules, what I'm going to go through here is if you had to do it without a calculator, which makes them way more difficult, obviously, but on the test, you're going to have a calculator. So if you want to put these in a calculator and just get the answer, I can't fight you on that.
Wait, what are we going to take it out?
No, I won't know. How am I going to know whether you use the calculator or not? Unless I made you write out all the work. And I don't want to teach enough to have you comfortable writing out all the work if you don't have time. So I'm not going to worry about that this year.
Woo!
Okay? What do you have to do to add and subtract decimals? What do you have to do to add and subtract decimal numbers?
Can you roll on where you have
I'm not going to give you the next slide because it gives the answer. 3.1 plus 2.05. If I'm going to add these two numbers up, what do I have to do? Olivia.
Yeah. I think I know. You have to evenly put it under the first number.
Correct. You have to line up.
You have to line up the numbers with the decimal.
The decimal points, right? You have to line up the decimal points. That's the key to adding and subtracting decimals. Lining up the decimal points when you add and subtract is the same as getting a common denominator.
Which means for the 2.05, you would have to move to the right.
Well, when you do these out, you would write this, line up the decimal points, right? And then fill in zeros, right? Fill in zeros and then just add 5, 1, 5. The decimal point is right there.
Cool.
Now,
Easy.
this is really the same thing that you do with fractions. When you add fractions, you have to add pieces that are the same size. When you add or subtract fractions. When you add or subtract decimals, you have to add pieces that are the same size. The pieces in decimals are hundredths, tenths. That's my wife. Let me take that. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Oh, you mean me get mine? Maybe in a little bit. How'd you get it? Okay. Okay. Yep. Vaccination appointments.
I can hear your wife talking.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is hundreds plus hundreds, same size pieces. Tenths plus tenths, same size pieces. The decimal point keeps the pieces lined up. Ones plus ones, same size pieces. Okay. So adding and subtracting decimals, you have to have the pieces the same. Okay, just like when you subtract. So these notes will be available to you on a PDF here after we put them all in. If it's positive and negative, obviously, because it's 7th grade, then you have to use the rules for positive and negative numbers. So if they're both negative, it means you're going to add the values, right? So add these together and keep the sign. It looks like this if you do it by hand, right? Line up the decimal points and add.
That was easy.
It is easy, okay?
Yes, finally.
If one is positive and the other is negative, then you are going to subtract the values, bigger minus smaller. When you subtract, you also line up the decimal points. And remember, sometimes when you subtract, you have to borrow, right? If you subtract by hand. However, you guys have a calculator, so you don't have to worry about you're bad at that. Use a calculator. Okay. All right. Line up the decimal points. So like I said here, lining up the decimals is the same as getting a common denominator. It ensures that you add hundreds and hundreds, tenths and tenths, ones and ones, tens and tens. That's what happens when you line up the decimal point, okay? All right, multiplication and division. Did we have to worry about getting a common denominator when we multiply and divide fractions? No, the pieces don't have to be the same size. So when we multiply and divide decimals, we don't have to worry about lining up the decimals. We just multiply the numbers. I'm skipping these practice problems, okay? And again, it's going through, yeah.
What?
Yeah, it's just, I'm debating how much time to spend on this.
Is time beating us?
Subtracting decimals, line up the decimals, same change, right, for positive and negative. So this is good review of your positive and negative rules, just like fractions were good review, okay? 10.61 minus 2.87, line up the decimal points. You're subtracting these because this is a keep, change, right? Minus and negative is the same as plus. Now it's an addition and the signs are different, which means you subtract the values. Is your answer to this problem positive or negative? Is your answer to this problem positive or negative? It's
Positive.
positive because the bigger number was positive. When you add positive and negative numbers, you subtract the values, and your answer is there's more positives here than there are negatives, so your answer is positive. This one, 6.22 minus 14.5 plus negative 14.5. Adding numbers with different signs, I subtract the values. That was my wife again.
Let me guess, vaccination thing.
Can I get your my chart info?
What's in my chart?
Oof.
Mr. Riley, what's in my chart?
It's an online medical appointment thing.
You have an appointment soon? No.
Subtract, line up the decimal points, add zeros if you have to, right? This is 14.5, but you can add zeros out here as much as you need to, and subtract. So it's 8.28. Is it positive or negative? Negative 14.5 plus 6.22?
Negative.
Negative, because the negative number is the bigger one, okay? Multiplying. Again, same thing here. This, again, lining up the decimals, make sure that the pieces are the same. Normally, we would do all that practice and we would do this over a couple of days,
But we don't have.
not this year. To multiply decimals, you don't worry about the decimals. You pretend they're not there. Right? You just pretend the decimals aren't there and you multiply the numbers. And then at the end, the number of decimal places in your answer is the total number of decimal places in the two numbers that you multiplied, right? So this one has 2 decimal places and this one has 1, which means your answer then is going to have 3 decimal places. So you multiply everything out, you get 10,556, and then you put 3 decimal places in your answer. Okay? So 3.5 times 12, negative 12.62. Remember your rules for positive and negative. Negative times negative is positive. But I'm not going to care about that till the end. I'm not going to worry about lining up the decimal points. I'm just going to multiply these two numbers together. You can do that in your calculator. Of course, if you put the decimals in there, you'll just get the answer. 5 times 2 is I could go through long multiplication. Don't have time for that. Okay? But what we do need to remember here is 1 decimal place here and 2 decimal places here means 3 decimal places here.
Wait, why 3?
because there's 2 here and 1 here. However many there are in the numbers you're multiplying, that total number of decimal places is what you put in your answer.
Like the add number, wait, what, how do you fit 3 decimal places there?
Because the answer was 44,170. So 1, 2, 3 decimal places. Okay?
Not really.
1 is positive and 1 is negative. You still just so this answer, because it's negative times negative, is positive, right? Multiply, again, I don't need to line up the decimal points to multiply, just multiply, and you get
A very large.
87,848. Again, 1 decimal place here and 2 here means 3 in my answer,
Oh, okay, I see.
okay?
I thought you were adding 3 decimal points.
Nope, and this answer is negative because it's negative times positive. Okay? Division.
Yeah.
To divide decimals, you cannot divide by a decimal. Okay, so you might remember this from last year, right? If you have if you're dividing a number by a decimal number, you have to get rid of this decimal here. You can't have a decimal here and do long division. So you move this decimal point, however many places you have to move this to get a whole number, you move this decimal point the same amount of places. So this one moves 1 to the right, this one moves 1 to the right. You put your decimal point up where your answer goes, and then you do long division, which I'm certainly not going to go over right now. I'm not going to go over long division. But one thing you can think about, though, is if you divide this number by this little decimal, is your answer going to be bigger than 13.92 or smaller? You divide 13.92 by 0.4. Is your answer going to be bigger or smaller than 13.92? If you're how many times does this little decimal go into 13? Is it going to be more than 13 times or less? Way more. Okay, when you divide by a decimal, right, with no number in front, just like when you divide by a proper fraction, your answer is going to be bigger because those little fractions go in many times into a bigger number. Okay, so again, this one is, there is no moving of the decimal point, so you just carry the decimal point up here. And this one, when you divide by 0.4, you have to move the decimal point, which I didn't show here. Right, it was here, so it moves to there, because this one had to move to there, 1 place. Right, and you put the decimal point up here, and you do long division. You don't have to worry about this. You're not going to have to do any long division. You have a calculator. Okay? You have a calculator, which is going to give you the answers for decimals too. Right? So basically, you don't have to do anything in this lesson today except use a calculator properly, which is why I only spent 10 minutes on it instead of 2 days. Normally, if I had everyone in front of me and I could give you a test on this with no calculator, then we would have to go over how to do these things manually with paper.